and a big thank you, and a warm welcome. Thank you, of course, to Jewish Army Services and the Wellness Institute for this continuing series. A big thank you to our guest this evening, Dr. Elizabeth Dexter-Mazza. If you open up your siddur, part of the beginning of davening every morning starts with a small prayer, La'olam Yehei Adam Yirei Shamayim B'Seis V'Gadol. The person should always be God-fearing in private and in public. American Rabbi Rav Mendel Blachman and Rabbi Yavne would always say, in the name of Rav Simcha Zosser Breder, that the period is in the wrong place. The sentence should be read, La'olam Yehei Adam, be a person. Then, next on the list, Yirei Shamayim, God-fearing. Beginning of all religious growth, identity, ideology, perspective, is be a person, which is the entirety of the theme of this series, to be a person, to be a healthy person. And of course, the skills that we are going to be learning this evening are in that aim. Skills that are teachable, skills that are learnable, and skills that Dr. Dexter-Mazza is an expert in. Dr. Elizabeth Dexter-Mazza is a certified DBT therapist and a co-author of the DBT Steps, a social emotional learning curriculum for middle and high school students. She received her doctoral degree from the School of Professional Psychology at Pacific University in 2004 and completed her pre-doctoral internship at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. Dr. Dexter-Mazza completed her postdoctoral fellowship under the direction of Dr. Marshall Linehan at the Behavioral Research and Therapy Clinics at the University of Washington. And while there, she was the clinical director and research therapist for Dr. Linehan's research studies, which provided both individual DBT and DBT group skills training. She has published several book chapters and peer-reviewed articles on DBT, borderline personality disorder, and graduate school training in how to manage suicidal clients. Dr. Dexter-Mazza is a licensed psychologist and maintains a private practice in Seattle, providing comprehensive DBT skills, coaching and support to family members and friends of individuals with borderline personality disorder. It's an honor and a privilege to welcome Dr. Elizabeth Dexter-Mazza to BRS. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much. It's an honor for me to be here with all of you today. It's been a while since I've been in the state of Florida. I went to Florida State University and grew up in New York, and haven't been able to be down here in a long time, so I'm really grateful to be here. And you can see the title of my talk is Building a Social-Emotional Foundation to Elevate the Whole Child. The core of much of the work that I do is around working with schools in developing and teaching social-emotional learning as a part of general education. I've always thought, similar to the quote that was just given, to be a person means to be a whole person. And for us to educate a whole person, not just the academic child or the athletic student, but do we also think about the social student and the emotional student, of really looking at that whole person. And so I was really honored when I was offered to come and speak with you all tonight from both a parenting perspective and also when I think about the skills that we teach in schools, they're really not only skills that children and adolescents need, they're life skills that we all need on how to sit with, experience emotions, how to regulate our own emotions. There's a lot of stress and strife and difficulties going on in the world right now, and we all probably are having lots of emotions and big feelings about different things that are happening. And so tonight I really want to focus on how can we think about skills that we can use with our children, with each other, with our partners, with our colleagues, with maybe at our jobs, customers, whatever place that you interact with people, because right now we all need to focus on how can we be a little bit more of a whole person and thinking about that for each other. So with that, like I said, I'm really honored to be here with all of you. As you gave such a wonderful introduction for me, and I really appreciate that. So it's just a couple things here. Like I said, I spend most of my time working with schools about delivering and taking care of social emotional learning and taking care of the mental health of students. How many of you in here are parents? That's a lot of you. How many of you in here are in school? All right, good number of you. Any teachers? There you go. So you're in a school and you work with lots of people in schools. Excellent. There are a couple seats up here. There's some seats over here. I'm always like, come on up to the front. All right. So I'm from Seattle, Washington. So I probably could not have traveled further to get here. I'm here, as excited as I am to be here with all of you. I'm also visiting my mom, and stepfather, who are sitting in the back. They've never ever seen me speak before, so if I trip up or get a little nervous, it's because my mom's in the back of the room. All right, so let's talk about things. And I also move around a lot, but I'm also making sure I stay. So this is really funny. They put blue lines here, so I know how to stay in the camera. But there's a blue line in the center also, so I have to make sure I forget that one. All right, so what are we going to talk about? Let's talk about youth mental health for a moment, especially because many of you said you are parents. And in March of 2022, we knew before the pandemic started, in this country, we were having a real mental health crisis, right? And our youth were struggling. And after the pandemic and during the pandemic, we know things only got worse, not only for our youth, but also for many of our adults. These numbers went up. It's just easier to get the numbers from the youth because they're in school to look at that. But in 2022, we had 37% of our high school students reporting that they were experiencing poor mental health. A high number of almost half feeling persistently sad or hopeless. And the number that always is most heavy on my heart is 20% of high school students thinking about suicide, right? That's 1 in 5 students. Think about the number of students in your child's school or their friends, their friend group, right? Those numbers are pretty scary when you think about like, oh, my kid's got like 10 really good friends. Are you thinking that like 2 of them might be thinking about suicide? It brings it a little bit closer to home, doesn't it? You work in a school, do you see, what age group do you work with? Elementary. Well, it's happening in 4th, 5th, and 6th grades. We're seeing too an increase in that. And I'm not trying to scare anybody here, but what I'm trying to say is like, this is a real thing that we have to be thinking about. And we know the percentages for thoughts about suicide and poor mental health are even higher for any of our marginalized students. And that's any minority group of students from all different backgrounds. And what is most important that fits with that, if you can see this here, so I don't know if all of you can see that, I'll try not to go to the slide here, is that out of those high school students that are all reporting difficulties in mental health, 66% of them, 2/3 of them are also reporting a significant increase in difficulty in doing their academic schoolwork, right? And when I work in schools, that's what schools really care about for the most part. And I'm often talking to schools about this idea of like, who are we raising? Are we trying to raise high school graduates, or are we trying to raise stable, well-adjusted, functioning adults who can contribute to society and be successful, right? And if you want to balance that and think about not just getting through high school, but think about the trajectory of their lives, then we want to talk about mental wellness and resilience. At the University of Washington, my husband even teaches a class there to undergraduate students. In the last 5 years, he's taught this class to about 10,000 undergrads, 18 to 21-year-olds who choose to pay tuition credit dollars to voluntarily take our Steps A high school class. We've elevated it for college students because youth are starting to see how important it is that they have these life skills. And so part of the work I do now is not only with schools, but really spending time with amazing folks like you, parents, community members who, what if you don't have children, or what if your kids don't go to a school that teaches social emotional learning, or it's not a priority in the schools or the areas where you are, and your kids just end up not going to a university that teaches this. How do you bring this to your own homes and your own community? And that's what I'm here to talk about tonight. So thank you all for inviting me to talk about this with you. So one of the things that we also found from that CDC study that was done in 2022 is that gave us all of those percentages, is one of the things that they said, that the kids who had less depression, less suicidal thoughts, less difficulty doing homework, were the ones that had built supportive connections to adults and peers at home, at school, and in their communities, right? That's the thing that is so important. The more connected they felt, the less poor mental health they had, the less thought of suicide and suicide attempts they had. So another reason, just kind of like why I'm here with all of you. And with that, I am the parent of 3 kids. I have 17 and 15-year-old boys and an 11-year-old daughter. So I am in like the thick of parenting. And you know what? Parenting is really hard. Anybody else have that experience? Is parenting hard? Right? It's got the good days, but then there are those really hard days. And even on the good days, you still go to bed at night worrying about future hard days that are coming up. And so we really always want to think that. And it's hard, and at the core of it, I always think we need to find some balance, right? We can't lock them up and keep them home all the time so that they don't get in trouble. My husband and I like have conversations regularly about like, one of our jobs is to keep them alive till they're 18, right? I was like, well, I can do that. They might not like us, and they might struggle when they leave the house when they're 18, so we have to find balance in what that looks like. And I'm so glad I'm old now, or older, than my teenagers, because I grew up in the 90s when I thought it was hard then, but it was so much easier than it is to now to be a kid and a teenager. And how many of you have recognized any of these symbols on here? Yeah, right. Anybody have any really like them, have any struggles with them, see any problems with them? All of it, right? There's a balance, there's things on it. And I can tell you as a parent, when I see these things, like, this is what I look like. I'm just like, right, the screen, put the screen down. How come every time I see you, I have the screen on? You know, it's like eating at your brain. You're always on it, right? And my kids, though, when they see it, they be like this, like, right. Life is so good and everything. I'm distracted. I don't know what it means to be bored. Because why would you ever be bored in the world today? Because there's always something to entertain me at my fingertips, right? Very different life than I grew up in. Y'all have that similar experience, right? It's just different, and it's not all bad, but we've got to start thinking about it. So a couple things that I really think about as we go through this, and I recognize I've got to find balance. I've got to see that this is their experience. And they know, my kids know, that this is mine half the time. They're like, you just think it's all bad. It's not all bad. I use a lot of social media. I do use it for work reasons, for social reasons, you know, but it's also not all great all the time, you know. And so I think there's some steps that we have to go through with as we walk through. And the very first step, I think, is to educate, right? And I'm always thinking when I educate, it's not just about educating parents, but it's also about educating children and teenagers about what are the things we need to think about when it comes to it. And because I'm a psychologist and my kids know I like research and data, I like to share the research and data with them as well. You know, but today we're going to talk about how do we first educate ourselves as parents, as colleagues, as friends, as family members, as partners, validate, and then collaborate and evaluate as we kind of go through each of these things with them. So let's talk about educate. What do we want to educate them on first? I always think in regards to educating, what's the science behind why I say I want them to limit their screen time or spend more time in real life with social friends? What are some of the pieces behind it? And one thing that shows up a lot for me, I'm going to show you a brief little video here that just gives a little bit of background into the science behind screen time and some of the impacts of it. How many of you have seen the documentary called Screenagers? You've seen Screenagers, a couple of you? Highly recommend Screenagers. Did you, I had like a 20-second cameo in that movie on it. But there's actually a series of 3. It's called Screenagers, Screenagers Next Chapter, and then this third one, the first one's about all the use of screens in teenagers, the second one's about screens' impact on mental health, and the third one is on substance abuse. It's a great series to show, and I'm just going to show you a brief clip out of it from the director, Dr. Delaney Rustin, who's a friend and colleague of mine, who's developed all of these documentaries, and where she talks about, as she was raising her own teenagers, looking at and trying to understand in this new technology world, how are screens impacting us and what they do. So I want to show you this really quickly, and then we'll kind of talk about the piece that I think is really important. Let's see.
Now that you have done all this research, what was it, I'm curious, that most surprised you that you found?
Well, I think one thing that really helped me to start to be a better parent around this is to learn that the dopamine that's secreted in the brain's pleasure center when we get new bits of information and we look at the screens, that center of the brain is most activated when we're kids and we're teenagers. So knowing that they are so pulled into these in a way that we can't even understand has made me not be as angry at them, but realize there's a lot more I need to do as in my parenting.
So these are little electronic drug delivery devices. I know that's a crude way to put it, but that's what you're saying.
Absolutely. I mean, it's amazing that there's many studies that look at MRI scans of the brain of kids who play a lot of video games, 20 hours or more of video games a week. And when they compared them to people who are addicted to, say, drugs or alcohol, their brain scans are similar. So something is really happening on a physiological level. It's not just psychological.
We exposed young minds to switching sounds and light.
In the film, Rustin talks with researchers who are studying what multitasking, switching rapidly back and forth between
That's another part of the story I'll tell you after. Well, let's just talk about what we just saw there. Is that what Dr. Rustin talks about is the fact that screens activate our dopamine receptors, right? It's like these little drug delivery centers that's happening, and that sets off our emotional response system. There's also some additional research that says extended amounts of screen time have an impact in that they tire out our prefrontal cortex. Every time you see me do this means I'm referring to my prefrontal cortex, right? The prefrontal cortex of our brains is our executive functioning center. It's where our problem solving, our decision making happens. And when we use extended screen time, and this is both for adults and for children, our prefrontal cortex gets tired, our decision-making, problem-solving center. And when that gets tired, it opens up the neural pathways. This is how I refer to my amygdala, or my limbic system, my downstairs emotion brain, opens up the neural pathways for it to take over, right? So those extended amounts of screen time increase our vulnerability to more emotion mind, as we call it. Right? So if you've ever had a serious situation where either a kid or somebody you know, maybe even yourself, where you've been like, I've done this with my kids, like, I've got some work to do, and you guys have been really good, why don't you just go play video games? Anybody do that before, right? And then you're like, oh, I'm such a great parent. But then you're done working, and you're like, all right, 5 minutes and wrap it up. And then you say 5 minutes, wrap it up, they don't want to get off. And then 2 minutes, wrap it up, they don't get off. And when they do get off, and you thought you've just given them this gift, they're really grumpy, right? And they're irritable and short, and you're like, I just gave you a gift. But how come you're being so grumpy? Their prefrontal cortex is tired out in that way, right? And their emotion regulation system is having a harder time on that. And so I think that's something to be really important, not just with kids. I know the same happens for myself, for other adults that I'm with. When you spend too much just kind of scrolling those like quick videos, short, like attention, it gets our brains tired. And so just even paying attention to that, I think, is a significant part of the ability to educate. Because when our prefrontal cortex shuts down and what I call emotion mind, or our limbic system activates, we're not able to engage in new problem solving, right? We're not able to have rational thinking, right? Think about any person you've gotten into a heated emotional conversation with before. Have you ever had the thought when listening to them, like, they are being so irrational, No matter what I'm saying, what they're saying doesn't make sense, and they're not listening to reason or logic. Yes? Okay, just making sure I don't live in an alter world, right? That when you like, some are like, their emotions are high, and they're like, it just doesn't make sense, right? Because when our prefrontal cortex shuts down, we have distorted thoughts, and what then also happens is we have a hard time engaging what I call non-mood dependent behaviors, non-emotion driven behaviors. Our emotions are driving the bus. And that's because our limbic system gets activated and our emotions go up in intensity. And we can only then focus on what's driving our emotional experience. So it's important that we are aware of that and get to pay attention to it as our brain gets excited. All right, so here's a little test for you. If this were you, what would you choose? All right, if you had the choice between pleasure and joy or boredom and work, what would you choose? All right, so why would we expect anything different from our kids? Right, isn't that important? Right, it's that kind of same idea. If I ask kids, are you gonna go, your brain want that or the brain that looks like that? Right? Oftentimes because we've done so much of this, then we look like that, but that's what's happening. And just to kind of give you a little bit of background about what's happening inside our heads and recognizing when the prefrontal cortex is shut down, our emotion mind or our limbic system is taken over. One of the jobs for us as the other person in the engaged experience, or even for ourselves, to think about what do I need to do to get both parts of my brain back online and working together. And so we're going to go in and talk about different skills and strategies to be able to get our brain and our prefrontal cortex, our decision-making, rational thinking back online. I'm hoping you all will find that helpful to you. To think about what do I do when my emotions are really high? How do I get through this? All right. So the first step I always work with folks on is talking about validation. Right? There's a lot of conversations about validation, and I know a lot of people have heard that phrase before. And I always say there's a difference between knowledge and behavior. We might know what validation is, but our ability to do it is sometimes a little bit more difficult. So I want to talk about some of the steps of validation, some things to think about, and some of the foundations of it. And I'm going to show you a couple of videos on this as well that focus on what is validation and how do we do it. How many of you are familiar with Brene Brown's work? All right, so I'm going to show you a video, and some of you may have seen this one before, but this video is not about straight validation. I told you I might trip over it even with the tape. This is about what is the difference between sympathy and empathy. And I start with this video before I go into validation because we really need to understand that empathy is the foundation for being able to verbally validate somebody else or ourselves. So we'll watch this and then we'll talk a little bit more about validation. And I will say, I have seen this video many times, so even those of you who've seen it before, I think it's always a great refresher to remind ourselves, what are the key little things that Brene Brown talks about here? Let's watch that.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different from sympathy? Empathy fuels connection, sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think that empathy is this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. I have it, yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around. So I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right. So let's just talk about that one for a moment before we go to the next video about empathy. So we can see, how many of you had the thought, oh, I've done that. Don't worry, we've all done it. I'm an expert validator, as my husband likes to tell me, until I get home, right? Sometimes when you do something for a living, you're not always the best. Or sometimes my emotions get in the way as well on that. So don't worry if you've done it. We've all invalidated ourselves or someone else at some point. It's the continual invalidation. And it's in those moments when we want to practice being aware and mindful to when can we shift on that. So don't worry if you've done it. Don't beat yourself up. Don't judge yourself there. So Brene Brown just talks about the difference between sympathy and empathy. Empathy is about connection, being there, not trying to make the person feel better or solve, right? And somewhere along the line in society, we've turned into what I call a feel better society. Somebody's uncomfortable, what do we need to do to feel better? How do we distract you? How do we pull you away from it? I was just having dinner with some family members, and they were telling me how with their grandchild, the grandchild's parents the grandchild is 4, and he was like having a meltdown when he didn't want to leave his grandmother's house. And he's just like, I don't want to leave, and he starts crying. So the grandmother went to get like a stuffy out of the bedroom to give to him what to say, like, oh, here, you can take the stuffy home with you. And the dad stopped the grandmother and said, nope, don't do it, don't solve it. And instead took their son down and sat him on the couch. He's like, you're having some really big feelings right now. I know. And so I'm just gonna sit here with you and let me know when you need a hug, right? And sat there with the child and let him tantrum for 5 minutes. He wrote out his emotion until he got, and then he's like, all right, now I need a hug. And then they all went on. Do you know how incredibly hard it was for that dad to probably sit there, right? Because as a parent, our instinct is how do we make our child feel better? How do we soothe them? How do we make them comfort, right? And we've moved to this place where we can't tolerate discomfort. And this is all about how do we start shifting back to doing what I say we have to teach people is how do we embrace discomfort, more so emotional discomfort in this. And so this video, it's a cute video. Who's anybody here seen this video before? It's not about the now. Got a couple of you? All right, so the rest of you are gonna get to watch it now, and then we'll talk about validation from this perspective.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's gonna stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me most, is that I don't know if it's ever gonna stop.
You do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing.
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail.
See, you're not listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy sweaters are snug. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It's, thank you.
Hold on, if you would just
Don't.
All right, so it's not about the now, always. How many of you are problem solvers? All right, fixers, feel better people. I mean, I became a psychologist because I wanted to help people feel better, solve their problems, change their lives. And sometimes moving into problem solving is the most difficult thing. Did I tell you that my husband's also a psychologist? Right, so we used to do this dance early on in our relationship. Like, we'd come home from work and I'd be like, how was your day? And he'd say, fine. And then he'd say, how was your day? And I'd give him the moment to moment breakdown of it. But I'd say like, oh, this thing happened and I was just so frustrated about it. And he'd look at me, he's like, well, why don't you try this? Or why don't you do this? Did you do that? And how do you think I felt? Incredibly invalid. I'm like, dude, do you think I don't know how to do my job? Yes, I know what I'm supposed to do. I'm just telling you what I needed. So over time in our relationship, we learned to, like, there's times when we simply ask, right, so what do you need right now? Do you need problem solving or validation? Do you need me to help you fix it or do you just need me to listen, right? Is to actually be straightforward, like, right now, I just need you to listen. So it's not always about the now, we know what to do, and it's needing that support in there. And that's what validation starts with. And I think a big part of why I always teach about validation first is because if we don't validate, we're not going to get that connection to be able to problem solve together. And additionally, I think validation is the path to getting that prefrontal cortex back online, right? Because when our limbic system, or what I'll refer to as our emotion mind, is in control, emotions are going up, up, and up. And one of the things that tends to make our emotions go up even higher is when we are, one, being invalidated, or two, not being validated at all, right? So it's hard to get to problem solving, reasonable, logical thoughts, get away from those distorted thoughts when our prefrontal cortex is not online. So my first gift to you is to teach you how to validate so that when you're distressed or you're in conversation with somebody in a relationship that's distressed, whether it be a partner, a coworker, or a child, validation has to come first so we can get everybody's prefrontal cortexes back online along with their emotion mind as well. And so there's some things that I think are really foundational on this, and this is one of the handouts from I'm messing this all up over here. Hold on. Don't mind me, just fixing the tape. There we go. All right. I'm glad you're all laughing with me. We'll figure it out. All right, so this is one of the handouts from my manual where we teach skills in schools. And I actually think, I tell everybody, I think this is the most important handout. Because says, does my emotion or my child's emotion make sense? When does an emotion fit the facts? We are biologically hardwired as human beings to have certain emotions in certain situations, right? And so this handout is all about what are those situations in which we have different emotions. And so some of them seem pretty obvious. Well, let's talk about, like, when you're scared, what are the situations that tend to make us scared as people? When there's a threat to our lives or the life of someone we care about, when there's a threat to your health, and there's a threat to your well-being. So that student who's really afraid of failing a test, or getting in trouble and getting kicked out of school, or getting in trouble and getting grounded by their parents, that all falls in the well-being category, right? That it makes sense that you're scared for your parents to find out that you got a bad grade, or that you got in trouble at school, or for you to find out that your partner didn't pick up the groceries they said they were going to pick up on their way home, right? They may be scared for their well-being on that. But that's when fear makes sense. Anger, which I think is one of the most important ones to be able to validate, is anger makes sense when an important goal is blocked, right? Or when someone you care about is attacked or hurt by others. And most importantly also, when you have the experience that you're losing power or respect. right? And why I think it's so important about anger is because often when somebody gets angry, they engage in more angry behaviors. And it's the angry behaviors that people do that get them in trouble, or that other people don't like, or that blows up relationships, right? And so I've worked with kids in schools, like I had a kid once who the teacher had said, like, all right, everybody, you've got to work on this assignment, and when you're done with the assignment, you can have free time on those class laptops and play games until we move on to the next subject. And so this one student was totally motivated by screen time, go figure, on that. And so he was working really, really hard to get this assignment done. And this is a kid who has difficulty like staying focused, paying attention, the academics don't come easily to him. And he's working really hard, and he finally gets it done. And he goes and he gets the laptop and he opens it up. And when he opens it up and he starts to play, the teacher says, okay, everybody put everything away. It's time to move to the next subject. How do you think he felt? Angry. What do you think he might have done? He slammed that laptop down and screamed, right? Did his anger make sense in that moment? Yeah, an important goal of his was blocked, right? It's not okay that he slammed the laptop and yelled or did whatever behavior. Can we validate his anger on that? And that's where validation comes in, is we're going to talk about in a moment like what to validate, but we can validate his anger, not his behavior, but his anger. Let's talk about some other ones. I always put up here jealousy and then talk about envy as well, because I think jealousy and envy are two emotions that people mix up all the time. So jealousy is the emotion that we have when an important relationship is being threatened, that I might lose it, something's gonna take away. So if I think that woman out there is flirting with my husband and I'm at risk of her taking him away from me, I might feel jealousy. Envy, when we feel envious, envy is when somebody else has something you want or think you should have. So I might get envious of the Hawaiian vacation somebody's going on. I'm envious that they're going on that vacation. I want that, or think I deserve to have that. I get jealous of somebody trying to steal my partner, envy of somebody who's got something I want. Does that make sense? Right? And so it's important that if we can understand what are the general scenarios in which we have emotions, gives us the power to validate more effectively. Love is the emotion we have when the person, animal, or object improves our quality of life or those we care about. When someone gives you want, need, or desire, right? Connection, family, intimacy, relationship, that's when we might feel love. Sadness makes sense when you've lost something you care about. When you think about grief, when we lose a loved one, a family member, or a pet, or even a stuffy, something we care about, someone we care about, we feel sadness. We also get sad when things didn't turn out the way we hoped they would, right? In that situation. That's a time for sadness. So think about scenarios that you've been in for yourself when, I've been really sad yesterday and today because Florida State did not make it into the college football playoffs. A lot of anger, a lot of sadness happening for me, right? Is it valid? Absolutely. On that, I hope some of you all are feeling that way too. Yeah. But things didn't turn out the way I hoped they would be, so I'm feeling sadness about the college football playoffs. Shame and guilt. The way we talk about shame and guilt in DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, is a little bit different on the surface of how Brene Brown talks about it, but foundationally they're very much the same. Brene Brown will talk about shame and guilt in that guilt is when you've done something bad, shame is when you think you are bad, right? That's how Brene Brown looks at it. In DBT, Marsha Linehan thinks about guilt is when I've done I've done a behavior that goes against my own values. That's when I feel guilt. And shame is when I've done something that goes against the values of the community or the group, and I'm going to be rejected or kicked out. So shame serves the function to keep us engaging in pro-social behaviors within the community and to be able to see that. So like I said, surface-wise, they're a little bit different. Foundationally is that shame, if I'm getting kicked out, of the group, that's when I start to think there's something wrong with me. I am that, similar to Brene Brown. But I wanted to go over this with you because I think this is like the #1 step to being able to validate both yourself and others. Self-validation is as important as other validation of other people. Because if we invalidate ourselves, saying things like, so stupid, I shouldn't be feeling this way, I know I'm being a baby, I shouldn't be scared about this, there's nothing for me to be sad about. Anybody have those thoughts before? Right? Does that help you to feel better or worse when you do that? Worse, probably brings up the intensity of your emotion because invalidation fuels emotion intensity. All right, so we have to be able to look at how are we biologically hardwired as humans to understand when do our emotions fit the facts and make sense, and for others as well. Questions about this slide? So I think it's a really important one. I don't know if you have any questions before I move on.
What do you do with someone who has these emotions and it doesn't fit the facts?
All right, let's go to that as well. So, what is validation? And we're going to get to the fit the facts ones, right? Validation basically means to say the other, corroborate, substantiate the other person's position. To basically say, I understand your position. I get where you're coming from. I see how that is your experience of making sense to you. What validation is not is approval, praise, or permission. Right? So those are really important pieces there. I've spoken to lots of people and I've had parents and teachers and all the different folks I've worked with who will say things like, I validate my kids all the time. I tell them how proud I am of them. I can tell them that they're working really hard and they're doing a good job. Like, that's really nice, except that's not validation, right? That's approval and praise. And praise, public praise for some people is highly reinforcing, and for some, it's highly punishing, and it'll get them to stop doing the thing you want them to do. And so we have to remember that you can understand someone's other position without agreeing or approving of it. And then to your next question, we have to ask ourselves, so what do we validate? What if not everything is validated? How do we figure it out? And the way I think about this most is that we can validate somebody else's emotions, thoughts, and or their behaviors. All right, they're 3 different things. And sometimes I can validate your emotions without validating your thoughts. So I say we can validate what's valid and not validate the invalid. So I'll give you an example of what I mean, because emotions are always valid for the most part that we think about it. So I am deathly afraid of snakes. Like, even the idea, like I mentioned the word and I can start to feel the tingles in my toes. How many of you want to get your feet off the floor right now? Like, I'm so scared of them. Like, I think they're gonna kill me. If they get into my yard and die, like they're gonna infest my yard and then take over my house and the pipes and everything, like super irrational. And the snake that I am most afraid of are garter snakes. Right. Look at this gentleman over here. He's like, he was doubting, he's like rattlesnakes. I'm like, no, not rattlesnakes, garter snakes. Is my fear of garter snakes valid? That I think they're gonna kill me? Is my fear valid? Yes, my fear is valid. Are my thoughts valid? No, my thought is not valid. Garter snakes are not dangerous to humans. However, but if I have that thought, it makes sense that I have that emotion, right? So you might validate me and say, totally makes sense that if you think they're gonna kill you, why you'd be scared. Maybe we need to go check the facts about your thoughts, would be the place that we have to look at. But you can validate my emotion without validating my thought. Now, I will also tell you, not only am I afraid of garter snakes, I'm also afraid of rattlesnakes and boa constrictors and every other possible kind of dangerous poisonous snake out there. Is that fear valid? Yes. Are those thoughts valid? Yes. Is my behavior of running and screaming from those valid? Yes. Is my behavior of running and screaming from garter snakes valid? No. Right? So can you see how one thing is valid? My emotion is always valid. My thoughts and behaviors don't have to be. Right? Does that help answer that? Does that make sense? And so we're looking at that so we can validate their emotions, right? That's typically the go-to place when you're not sure what to validate their emotions. You can ask questions about what they're feeling as well. Because that is really the first step. And like I said, you can validate the emotion without validating the problem behaviors that go along with it. Because like, I can validate that student's anger. It makes sense that you were angry that you didn't get to play on the video games on the computer. And it's not okay to slam the computer or yell or throw things in class. Both can be true. Your emotion can be valid without the other. It's not a blanket statement when we give validation. Alright, so where should we focus, right? Because part of it is not all validation. We can't just validate. We also sometimes do need to go to problem solving and change. But the way that we do that is really helpful in our relationships and communication. So, I know not all of you can see this over here, but it says validate the emotion. How do you validate the person? You can say, I hear you, it's really sad. Right? You're really sad that you're not in class with your friends this year, or that you didn't get invited to that party, or you didn't get that promotion at work. It makes sense that you're worried about what's happening in the world right now, given all that is occurring. I'm really frustrated too, right? If you're having a similar experience to that person, a similar emotion, we call that normalizing validation, right? If this is an emotion that most people would feel, you could say that, like most people would feel like that in your situation. I'm feeling really anxious about this too, right? That is a type of validation. You know, I enjoy this too. It's hard not to do be on screens when you're bored, when there's lots of interesting things. I mean, that's the problem with like social media, right? They put out a lot of interesting things and the algorithms are all set to only show you things that you've showed interest in, right? It's all tied in that way together. And so we can validate that for them. And we don't have to end there. We can also work towards problem solving for the things that maybe we're struggling with our partners or our colleagues or other people, right? I think it's really helpful. We can validate their emotion, and if somebody needs help, the first thing I always try to encourage people to do is to not just give help, ask them if they want help. Ask them if they need some help figuring it out, right? Do you want that? Because one of the things, like I said, with my husband in that scenario I mentioned earlier, is if he just starts telling me what to do in my job, it becomes more invalidating in that he thinks I'm not capable. And sometimes we are capable. You know, my daughter, this is what happens when you're the daughter of two psychologists who write social emotional skills training curriculum for schools. They learn these things. But she actually learned this also in preschool, not from us, that if your kids were ever in a classroom that had like the quiet corner, in her preschool classroom, they had a quiet corner. It was like this little kind of like makeshift like area with pillows, and it had sheer curtains around it. So you could always see what was happening inside, but it was a quiet place where the kids could go and pull the curtains around them. Or I've seen some classes that have like, they have these at IKEA, like I call them the Mork and Mindy egg chairs. Who remembers Mork and Mindy, right? And he had that egg thing that he sat in, and they have ones that you can pull the cover over, right? But she would go in there and she'd get really upset or tantrum and everything, and she would either go into this area in the classroom or to the egg chair at home. She like climbs into bed and pulls the cover over her head. Like when she's doing that, I'm very aware, because I'm her mom, that that's her regulating her emotions. It's actually a skill we call like take a brief vacation. It's the V in one of our improved skills. When you have high emotion and you don't want to act on your emotions and make them worse, take a brief vacation. Go somewhere, get into bed, pull the covers over your head to just shut out all that stimulation. But if every time she ran up to her bed and pulled the covers over because she was crying, and I went in there like, what can we do to make you feel better? What's wrong? Maybe your brothers weren't really trying to tease you, they're just being brothers, like whatever it could be, like that wouldn't have been effective. So sometimes you either have to ask, or if you already know that that's a coping strategy that they have, to tolerate, validate yourself. Wow, it's really hard to watch my kid cry, and I know this is how she's regulated, right? That's how I just self-validated myself. But you can ask them, you know, would you like some help solving this? Do you know what to do, or do you want help figuring it out? I have an idea, are you open to it? I would highly suggest that before giving advice, we ask if somebody actually wants it. Because if you start giving advice, telling them what to do, how do you feel when people start telling you to change and do things, right? Like for me, my heels just dig in a little bit deeper and a little bit harder when you start telling them, like, no, I'm not doing it. Now just because you said it, I'm definitely not doing it, right? And so we want to think through some of those things. The other thing that I think is really helpful, as you probably noticed in that last slide, in the middle of that big purple triangle, it said and. I think and is one of the most powerful words we can use in relationships with other people. I think of the word but as a giant eraser. And when you're having a conversation with someone or you're giving feedback to somebody, you say, wow, you're doing a really great job, but, right, now let me punch you in the face with all the things you've done wrong on that. It kind of erases all of that and they stop hearing everything. And so one of the things I teach is how do we replace the word but with and? Like I can say, you know, I really love my baby, but she cries all the time. Right? How does that feel when I say that? To just like think about viscerally versus if I say, I really love my baby and she cries all the time. It just lands differently, doesn't it? Like when you replace the word but with and, it can be both. I love her and she cries. You're working really hard and I need you to do more. Both are true, right? I think about it this way.
The mic is thrown down for a minute. And just try this, even if in your chairs. Put yourself into this position, like this ready fighting position. Let me see if I can do this without camera there. Put yourself in this ready fighting position, right? Right? If you ever take a boxing class, like they tell you protect your face, right? Get ready, you know, get ready for that counter punch. This is what I think people experience when they hear the word but. They go, whoop, all right? And then they're already starting to think about what's my counter to protect myself, to defend myself, to come back. I'm not even listening to everything else that happened. When I hear but, I go whoop, and I'm getting ready. I'm no longer listening to what you're saying. Now do this. Put your hands out here at your sides. This is and. I'm open, I'm vulnerable, I welcome the feedback because I know you're not going to punch me in the face with the big gun. All right. So even shifting that, so if we can use and with our validation, it helps shift how people hear us in conversation. All right. It helps bring that prefrontal cortex back online, bring down the intensity of those emotions. So I encourage you to say this, and I tell all families that I work with, and schools and teachers and classes and everybody I can make listen to me and say, the number one thing to do is like, I will say to people all the time, like, okay, I'm working on this of trying to use the word and more. So if you hear me say but, can you please just gently help me out and just say, and, like non-judgmental, nice, just call it out for me so it brings it to my attention so I can shift my words. Will you do that for me? Do you think that would be helpful? And after they say yes, like, do you think that'd be helpful to you? What if we do that for each other? Can we give each other permission to say and when we see each other? Is that okay? And now I've got a whole group of people starting to mindfully pay attention to themselves and to each other to try to shift their language all together as a group. All right? So everybody, you all know each other for the most part in here somewhat. Look at each other and be like, all right, are we gonna be and people? All right, can we do it? Can we be and people to each other? Non-judgmentally, supportive, all right. Okay, all right, so that's validation, right? Just even, I'm not even going through lots of practice of validation with you because I'm mindful of time, but I just want you to have these foundational pieces of understanding how you can validate an emotion without validating the thoughts or behaviors that go with it, and to be able to understand those principles of why we're biologically hardwired as humans to have certain emotions and what that looks like, because that's the number one piece for ourselves. The more we can self-validate or validate other people is one of our most effective emotion regulation strategies. So let's talk about how do we collaborate next and work on some strategies for changing emotions
and understanding. And this first one I'm going to talk about is what I call also here dialectical thinking, and it's part of validation as well. But this is just an example of, back to our screen time topic here of parents, like as a parent, I always want my kids to be off their screens. And they think I think screens are just all bad all the time and that they shouldn't ever be on them, which is not really true. But sometimes they get stuck in what I call non-dialectical thinking or all or nothing thinking. And they think, I just don't like them seeing all these things. And so there's a skill that we call in dialectical thinking, how do you honor the truth in both sides? How can you increase your perspective taking to understand the other person's position? And so this is just kind of an example of the reasons why a teenager may want to have more access to social media and screens, and the reasons why parents or caregivers might have concerns about those things, right? And even when I teach this in school, I have the kids do this exercise in the classroom where the teenagers have to answer for their parents. And I'll do it around this topic, I'll do it around curfew. If I've got kids who they want curfew's 10 p.m., but they want to stay out from 1 p.m. till 1 a.m. on Friday night because there's some party or event happening, and they just think their parents want to be in control and make their lives miserable and never let them go out past curfew. I might say, okay, can we think about put ourselves in your parents' shoes? What are all the reasons why your parents might want you home by 10 p.m.? They're trying to control my life. They, all the reasons. And then they'll get to, they're worried about my safety. They need to go to sleep early. They won't go to bed until I get home, whatever that might be. And then have them list all the reasons why. So here, the reason for doing this, and I think helpful for all of you to think about doing this if you're in a disagreement or trying to come up with a solution for differing opinions, is to write down what's the other person. So we can look at what are some of the reasons why teenagers might want to use screens and Snapchat and TikTok and all of the social media, right? To connect with friends. They have common memes. That's how they talk to their friends. They can keep up their streaks. The psychologists that went to work for the social media, I have lots of judgments about them. These streaks are all about contingency management, behaviorism. Conversation starters, funny videos to be silly, follow new trends, sharing what I'm doing with others, collect memories. They have a whole slew of reasons why they want to do this. And we as parents or caregivers might also have concerns about it. Worried about addiction, they're distracted from their work, they're not engaging in person in real life, IRL, in real life. They don't learn how to be bored, right? Sometimes you just have to learn how to be bored. I remember doing that as a kid so often because I'd go places with my parents, with my mom sitting in the back there, right? And sometimes I just had to go places with her because that's what children did. And it's not like you had a screen to do things, you just learned how to be bored. Also because, as I showed you earlier, it changes your brain chemistry on that. You might be exposed to inappropriate content. Are these valid reasons why I might not want them on that? And then you can practice for yourself, these reasons, but can you validate your child's reasons or a child's reasons for wanting to use social media when you think about it from this perspective? So I encourage you to try a strategy like this, and for my teenagers in the back, this really works well when you can think about all the reasons ahead of time for why your parents don't want you to do the thing you want to do. And then when you ask them, if you've already thought through their concerns and started to think about solutions that address their concerns, might increase the likelihood you get to do what you want. Doesn't guarantee it, but it might help when you start thinking about your parents' perspective. And same for us in a relationship, we start thinking about the other person's perspective. It actually increases connection, communication, and validation. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so we can also find a middle path on that scenario with our teenager about social media. It doesn't have to be okay, I see your perspective, so now you can do whatever you want. We can use understanding each other's sides to generate possible solutions, right? And the first thing with possible solutions, you've probably all heard the phrase brainstorming before, where we just throw out ideas and then we'll go and evaluate them after, right? So it may be a possible solution is that the team just gets unlimited screen time. They have some valid reasons for using it. They want to keep their phone with them day and night, or maybe the solution is that you get no phone or social media access. Go back to using a dumb phone instead of a smartphone on that. Manage screen time limits throughout the day, limit social media access during school hours, look at use together, discuss weekly, put your phone away during homework time, and limit distractions, right? Are there any that we might want to come up together with and say, like, why don't we try these? Do we have a solution that may fit what's important to both of us, right? So as a parent, if I'm worried about distractions from work, and they're not engaging in person with other people, and they may have too much or get exposed to inappropriate content, I might look at my list and say, okay, if we limit social media access during the school hours and put your phone away during homework time, does that meet some of my concerns? Yeah, it does. But then I have to look at my teen side also and say, well, does this meet yours? All right, so you'll connect with friends. Yes, you can still connect with friends, maybe just not during the school day over Snapchat, right? That means you'll have to talk to them in real life or in person on that. You can still watch funny videos and follow new trends, just not during the school day when you're supposed to be in class. And you can still share things, collect memories, be engaged. So maybe that's a possible solution that we can think of together. But this process of going back and forth, thinking about what's important to the other person, right? This is what we call searching for a synthesis rather than a compromise, right? Because in a compromise, we don't always take into consideration what's important to the other person. We just find something in the middle, like between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. We just say, all right, you can just be home by 11:30. But 11:30 may not actually answer the question or the concerns about missing out, having to be the only one who goes home early versus, yes, you might be out till 11:30, but I'm still worried about your safety. How are you getting home at 11:30? Where are you? Who are you with? I still need to go to bed earlier. I can't go to sleep, right? It's just a synthesis, a compromise, but it doesn't really get what we want. And sometimes compromise breeds resentment and disconnect in relationships. So searching for a synthesis of really thinking about what's important to the other person is part of building that connection and empathy. Let's see, we'll go back to this one. So then a couple of things I wanted to talk about now is then this last piece here of elevating. How do we elevate each other? How do we build more skills and strategies into what we're experiencing? And I always talk about this idea that the path to wise mind. Wise mind is what we refer to in DBT as when both your prefrontal cortex and your amygdala, your limbic system, so basically what we call our reasonable mind and our emotion mind are both online together, working collaboratively. That's what we call a wise mind. And the first step to wise mind, getting that prefrontal cortex back online, is first validation, but to observe and describe what's happening around us without judgment. You know, I think of judgments as shorthand for good and bad, right? When we use judgmental language, and judgments are also like fuel on our emotional fire. The more judgmental I am in my language, the more intense my emotion becomes. I had the best day ever. It was so amazing. It was incredible. Everything was so awesome. I loved it so much, right? My joy, my love is going up the more intense my judgments, even if they're positive. I'm like, this sucked. It was so stupid. I hate that teacher. They're so dumb, right? Is my anger and frustration going to go up the more judgmental I am? So we can describe things non-judgmentally. It helps bring down that intensity. We can still have our emotion. Instead of saying, you know, that guy outside today was such a jerk to me, right? If I say he was a jerk, what did he do? You don't know? Have you never called somebody a jerk before, or at least thought of someone as a jerk? You have, right?
Yes.
Yes, right? Okay, so what'd that jerk do, right? If I say jerk, you know what the guy outside did.
Yeah.
Right? What did he do? He did something that irritated. Maybe he didn't hold the door for me. Maybe he did hold the door for me, and I'm like, what? You don't think I can hold the door myself? You know? You really have no no idea, because jerk just says it's a shorthand for bad. He did something I don't like. And the more I call him a jerk, the more frustrated I get. Right? But if I say, that guy, I was coming in right behind him with all my bags, and he walked in and didn't hold the door open, it takes a lot more words, but the intensity of my frustration isn't as high. So describing what happened without judgmental language, I can still be frustrated, but I don't have to be, enraged, because judgmental language fuels. So when we use non-judgmental language, describe what happened with full words and takes a little bit longer, it helps for us to be more emotionally regulated. When we can bring our attention to being just in this moment, not what's going to happen in the future, weeks, years, months off into the future, we can just be right here, not about what happened in the past. Be in this moment. That helps to regulate us. And then, like I said, acknowledge about dialectical perspective. That's an idea of using and over but, of looking at the other person's perspective, right? And then using once we're in this moment, then we can even more activate even more coping skills. So I want to go over now just a few coping skills with you to think about as you go off from here. I'm building strategies for you to take home with you. And I think it is as important, and sometimes even more important, to not only know skills and strategies to help bring down the intensity of our painful emotions, of decreasing our anger, our anxiety, our frustration, our sadness. It's also really important that we can elevate our positive experiences and do what I call making deposits in our emotional piggy banks. If I can make more deposits into my bank, those rough days I have when I have high painful emotions and I need to make a withdrawal, I can make a withdrawal without going bankrupt, without being in the negative and completely depleting myself. So I want to tell you about 3 strategies that I think you can do every single day to increase the balance in your emotional piggy bank. And the first one is to engage in some kind of planned, joyful activity every day. Raise your hand if you do something every day that brings you joy. Okay. Less than a third of you raised your hand. All right. I know some of you are really? Wow. Because we get busy, right? We have busy lives. And sometimes you just go through your day and you forget I didn't do anything that was about joy, even if it's only for 20 minutes. I want you to think about, what am I doing? Can I do one thing that is focused on joy? This could be, watching mind-numbing TV, right? If it brings you joy, you're doing it for that reason versus just doing it because you're bored. Because you're just I'm going to go watch this show. And I'm going to have joy that. Or you have a pet, sitting with and playing with and cuddling with your pet, going for a walk, enjoying your coffee, right? To notice the joy in that. And not only do I think I want you to do that, I also want you to acknowledge it every day. So every night at my dinner table, when we're all around the dinner table, we have 2 things we have to do. And the first thing is gratitude. Where did you find what we call gratefuls, right? What are 2 things you are grateful for today, or 2 things in where you experience joy in your day, right? And it's got to be in your day. It's the last 24 hours. It can't be what am I grateful for in life. It's in the last 24 hours. Is there 2 things that you are grateful for? Right? Part of that is because I'm trying, in this world of negativity, I'm trying to increase as everybody mindful awareness to things that went well, not just how the day was bad and miserable and how much they hate their schoolwork and work and all the things they have to do. Where did you find joy or gratitude? And every day we do it to increase that mindful awareness of it. The other thing we try to help everybody do is to think about, what are your values, right? Do you know what your values are? And for many of us as adults, we have a pretty good sense of what our values are. But for kids and teenagers, at first, a lot of kids have the same values as us as parents because we've modeled and given those to them. But as they become older, they start to figure out, well, those are my family values. Are those actually my values still? right? And trying to develop it. And it's developmentally appropriate that teenagers may start to have different shifts in values that us as adults working, providing for each other, our families have. Those don't have to be all the same values that our teenagers have. And so, do you know what your values are? And are you engaging in goals and behaviors that are in line with those values? That's another thing you can have them do. And then the last thing I think is really important, and we do this at our dinner table every night as well, is about building mastery. Mastery activities are activities that are a little bit hard, right? They're not so hard that you can't accomplish them, but they're a little bit hard. And when you complete a mastery activity, you have a little bit of increased sense of competence and confidence, right? So my number one mastery activity is putting away laundry. I dislike putting away laundry so much, right? And so mastery activities are not things that I always enjoy, right? I don't enjoy putting away laundry. However, when my floor is clean, I feel an increased sense of confidence and competence that I just did something really hard. It took a lot of effort for me to do that, and I got it done. So if every day you can pay attention to and identify what is one thing you did to build mastery, what is one thing I did that was a little bit hard today, that starts to teach us that I can do hard things, right? It starts building our competence and resilience in there. And so think about kids. Have you ever known any of those kids who academically or athletically, things just came really easy to them? Maybe that was you, like when you were younger, that like athletically, like sports were just easy and you could just do them. And then you got to high school or to some level, and all of a sudden there were other people that it was just as easy and you had to work harder and things you couldn't figure out and you just wanted to give up because it wasn't fun anymore. Anybody have something like that? Or at schoolwork where like everything came easy and then you got to middle school or high school and it wasn't just like rote memory where you could just do it, but you had to like sit and use critical thinking and problem solving, and you want to just be like, nope, I don't like this anymore, I'm not taking the honors class, I'm just going back to regular, it's too hard. Have you seen some of those experiences with folks, right? That's because when things come so easy all the time, they don't learn that they can do hard things and how to persevere through it in those moments. So if you can do something with your family, with your colleagues, and your teams at work that are about what's one thing we all did that was hard today, we start building that resilience to learning that I can do hard things, to not give up in the face of difficult moments. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I hope that's something you take out of here. Using the word and, lots of it I hope you take out of here, but most of it, using the word and, gratefuls, and building mastery are 3 easy things you can do. The other thing that I think is really key here is also this idea of how do we decrease our emotion vulnerability in general by taking care of our bodies. We call these our please skills. And I talk a lot about the please skills because these are things that are totally common sense. We all know we should do them, and many of us probably don't. So let's walk through these. How many of you, when you are sick, you take care of yourself? If you're sick, you stay home, you take medicine, you rest, you don't go out and do things you probably shouldn't do. Does everybody do that when they're sick? All right, how many of you send your kids to school when they're sick? Maybe pre-pandemic, not as much now, but we're like, you're okay, you can still go, I gotta go to work. Like if you stay home and I gotta stay home, you can go to work, right? But when we're sick, do you feel a little bit more emotionally vulnerable and sensitive? All right. This limits screen time. We've already talked a lot about screen time, right? Extensive screen time makes us more emotionally reactive. All right, here's the one. Raise your hand if you ever get hangry. All right? Yeah, when you get hungry, you get a little angry, right? Or you have kids that I call, they get hiney. They get hungry and whiny, right? Right? We know if we don't eat, you get that low blood sugar, it sets off our emotion response system. We get a little more irritable on that. All right? Avoid overindulgence. You might say avoid overindulgence or avoid mood-altering drugs. Alcohol, substances, whatever it might be, right? Trying to avoid that, prescription or otherwise. Get balanced sleep. How many of you get 8 hours a night of sleep? 3 of you. Wow. Tell us your secret, right? But some of you might be getting too much sleep. Maybe you're sleeping 10, 12, 14 hours a night. Or, don't we wish, right? But then, there's lots of people maybe only sleeping 3, 4, 6 hours a night. And the more nights you go without sleep, the more emotionally vulnerable and sensitive you become. If you're retired, hopefully someday I will be, you get to enjoy the afternoon nap. That is true, you're getting some more, you're fixing up the sleep you can't get at night as your biology changes, you're getting during the day, right? And then exercise daily. How many of you move your bodies for at least 20 minutes every day? 22 minutes exactly over here, no more, no less. I would be like that with you, like I watch the clock timer, when am I done, if I have to. Right, common sense things. We all know we should eat a healthful diet, we should take care of ourselves when we're sick, we should move our bodies every day, we should get enough sleep. And we don't do it. And not doing it has a significant impact on our emotion regulation, right? How many of you as parents have been like, we're having such a good time, and when you've crossed the line with your kids, that you've just gone too long. Like, I'm a theme park person. I am like open to close theme park. We're going to Disney World. I spent all that money. We will be there when the park opens, and we will not leave till it closes. I don't care what the crowds are. And my husband is like, really? You're gonna do this again? Right? Because even if they're half asleep and now crying online, I'm like, we are going into it. Right? Not so effective for the emotion vulnerability factor there. Right? So now I have to tolerate all my own urges to keep going with them and say okay, fine. We don't have to stay till it closes, even though the parade's going on, and I know there's no lines at these rides on the other side of the park for that reason. I'll tolerate not going on it, right? Because we have to help think about those things with them. So that's a big part. All right, what else do I have? I've got 2 slides left for you, 2 sets of skills. All right, so the next thing I just want to think about here is, how do I coach myself and my child when we're struggling with painful emotions? So I already talked about validation. The other side of it, as I said, we are this feel better community, is sometimes our emotions, or people we know, their emotions are so high that if we don't help them and coach them through it, the situation's gonna get worse, right? They are throwing things and yelling things and either hurting themselves or other people or objects that you do have to help them regulate. And so I use a scale of 65 or higher, like on a scale of 0 to 100, with 0 being I'm so calm and relaxed, I'm basically asleep, and 100 being the highest my emotions have ever been. As for when I'm in emotion line and my emotions are running the show, I think about it at 65 is when my emotions start to take over. When, if I act on my emotions, things are likely gonna get worse in this situation. So one of the skills we have is called effective distraction. Many of us are probably expert distractors and can distract all the time if needed. However, sometimes distraction is not always effective. Sometimes we're distracting at moments when we really need to be present and paying attention. But effective distraction is mindfully shifting your attention away from your emotion and your emotion urges, so that you can ride out those urges until the intensity of that emotion comes down. So it might be, you can effectively distract with screen time for a limited amount of time, not just unending be on screens forever, because it might make you worse, or with video games or other activities. It could be going for a walk, it could be baking a cake for somebody else, because that's an activity that you can do. Somebody asked me earlier, but you can effectively distract with other thoughts. You were telling me about your children's book, and you talk about how to distract with thoughts by changing your thinking. Even in a room like this, if I had somebody in here who was feeling emotionally high, intense emotions, I might say, okay, right now, I want you to effectively distract by other thoughts. Count the ceiling tiles, all right? In school buildings, all of ceilings are like this. I tell kids all the time, just start counting the ceiling tiles. If you're counting the ceiling tiles, you're not acting on your emotion. So those are things that we can come up with ways to effectively distract. And then sometimes you also have to learn how to sit with and experience your emotion. When your emotion's at a 65 or lower, I want you to think about, how can I sit with it? And the thing that we as human beings don't like about emotions are the uncomfortable physical sensations we experience when we have them. So take for a moment and think about, when you feel anxious, where do you feel it in your body? In your chest? Maybe you feel like their stomach tightens, gets a little nausea going on, right? When you feel shame or embarrassment, where do you feel that in your body? Your face might get really hot, right? You know, for me, I get like nausea in my stomach. I get this heavy, hollow weight on my chest. Do you like how that feels? No, I'm just like, oh no, make it go away. And so that's what we often do as humans. We want to push the uncomfortable emotions away, right? Because who likes to be uncomfortable, right? However, what we actually need to do is take our attention and focus it on those sensations. Allow ourselves and our brain and our body to learn that if my emotion fits the facts, if it makes sense that I'm embarrassed for what I did, or my sadness makes sense because I've experienced a loss, let me sit with and feel it. I don't have to push it away. Because what happens if you just push it away? You invalidate it, it grows, and it comes back. But if you can sit with it, acknowledge, and let yourself experience it, then it'll come in and go out, just like a wave. We call that a wave skill, right? Of mindfulness of current emotions, sitting with and letting yourself experience an emotion by experiencing the sensations that you have with that emotion. All right, last thing I'll share with you. Another way to bring down the intensity of our emotion is by changing our behaviors. So again, I said as humans, we're biologically hardwired to have emotions. And there are times when we have emotions that make sense, they fit the facts, right? Given that list I showed you earlier. But there are also sometimes we have emotions, like my fear of garter snakes, that does not fit the facts. My thoughts that fuel it don't make sense. And so if we want to bring down the intensity of our emotion in those situations, one of the things we can do is change our behavior, because in addition to being biologically hardwired to have our emotions, each of those emotions are also biologically hardwired to give you the urge to do specific behaviors. So when you feel scared, what do you do to the things you're scared of? You avoid them, right? You want to escape or avoid, get away. When I think of a snake or hear a snake, I scream and I run. You know, my kids have never been into the snake house at the zoo because there's no way I go in there because I avoid it, right? That's what I'm biologically hardwired to do because of my fear. When you're sad, what do? You withdraw, you isolate, you do nothing. Think about grief and loss. When you sit Shiva, what is that? It's about to remove, to sit, grieve, right? We're biologically hardwired to do that, right? To experience our sadness. When you're joy, you get active, you engage, you do things. When we have shame or guilt, what do? We hide. I don't want anybody to see me in that way. And when we're angry, we attack. We yell, we scream, we fight back. Those are things we're biologically hardwired to do. And so the idea is the more intense our emotion is, the more intense these urges become. I really spend a lot of time teaching people how there's the urge to do a behavior, and then there's the actual doing of the behavior. But before every action is the urge. And between the urge and the behavior is a slight pause. And in that pause is a choice point. Do I act on my urge or do I tolerate my urge? Or if I want to change the intensity of my emotion, can I do the opposite behavior to my urge to bring down the intensity? So this idea, the bigger my urge is, the bigger my emotion is, the bigger my urge to attack, to hide, to escape, right, is. But if I want to bring down that emotion, if I do the opposite behavior to my urge, it will change my emotion intensity. So what is the opposite of avoiding and escaping? To move towards, to approach. If I wanted to bring down the intensity of my fear of garter snakes, what would I need to do? I would need to approach. I would not need to run and scream. I'd need to go look at them. I need to look at pictures of them. I need to, which I've gotten better, my kids, like we have like fake snakes in our house, and every once in a while I'll find one under my pillow. My mom's found one under her pillow before because she's afraid of them too. I found one in my wallet once that my 4-year-old shoved inside my wallet, so when I opened it, it popped out, right? They're working on my opposite action to decreasing my fear of snakes by exposing me to them, putting me around them in that way, right? When you're sad and you have the urge to withdraw and isolate, the way to decrease sadness is to get active, to do something, right? Because look, joy is to be active and engaged, to get active. Sometimes we need to bring down the intensity of our joy. Has anybody ever been too happy? And you're like, ooh, you are too excited. We need to bring that down a little. We need to remove you, take you away for a moment. Shame and guilt, the opposite of hiding, is to be open and present. And anger, we say instead of attacking, maybe you just need to gently remove yourself from the situation or the presence of the other person. Instead of screaming like, I can't stand you, I'm getting out of here, and you're running and slamming the door. I'm saying, you know what? I'm gonna go take a walk for the next 10 minutes. I'll be back. And I'm just gonna leave. But I'm not screaming and yelling when I do that. Or if I get really angry at my husband, one of the other ways to bring down the intensity of your anger, the opposite of attacking, is to do something that's a little bit nice for the other person. So maybe if I'm really angry at my husband, I'm decided like, but I don't want to be angry at him, right? Like he's doing the best he can, and even though he didn't do what I wanted him to do, really trying to bring down my anger. Anybody else have that, right? Like, okay, so you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna make him his favorite dinner, right? And so I'm sitting there and I'm chopping things, but what's gonna happen if I'm chopping things? I'm like, I can't believe he did that. And now I'm making him dinner, he's gonna really appreciate this. Is my anger gonna go down? No. So I can't actually just do opposite action to my anger by just being nice with my behavior and serving him his favorite dish. I actually have to be opposite all the way, which means I have to have opposite thoughts too. I can't keep having the angry thoughts if I want my anger to go down. So I want you to just kind of think about that. If when your emotions are high, you're thinking, how do we help bring the intensity down? Can I do the opposite behavior? Validate myself and do the opposite behavior to bring it down. How's that sound? Okay. All right. So I've given you guys a lot of content tonight. Just kind of, I feel like you brought me all the way in from Seattle. I had to like cram it all in, make it worth your time on a late night here. And so I so appreciate that. But I also want to just, if you open it up to what questions you have now from everything that we've talked to. Like I said, we started with validation. Well, first education and then validation as so important to all of your emotions. You're welcome. And then thinking about how do you collaborate and think about using dialectical thinking on things, and then finishing up with some of the skills around building joy, gratitude, and building mastery, and then thinking about how you sit with and experience your emotions, and then do opposite behaviors to bring down the intensity of your emotions is kind of everything we've covered tonight. So thank you so much. Yes, question?
You mentioned that the screen time decreases prefrontal lobe activity. Reading a book would have the same effect?
No, it's what it is the activity of screens of like social media and video games that have that high, quick frequency, that change, that just keeps adding new novel stimuli in quick manner is what it is. So reading a book doesn't do that. Reading a Kindle doesn't do that. It's that quick, rapid stimuli. Yes? Watching TV, again, not as much because it's not that quick stimuli. When you're watching a 30-minute show, it's dragging out, there's content, there's shows to it. So it can after a long period of time, like a really long period of time, but not in the same way as that rapid stimulation. It's the rapid stimulation that gets our brain tired. Yeah.
You had a statistic up in the front. It said 37% of the children suffer from lack of mental wellness. What can you define that?
Yeah, it was on a CDC survey that they said that they had poor mental health. That was an item that they indicated, like, my mental health's not doing well. I don't know what the exact question was on their survey, but it was a question on that survey that indicated their mental health was not strong.
I have a question.
Yes.
About the name,
Dialectical behavior therapy.
Yeah, and it kind of resembles neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, that I've been learning about recently.
Yes.
In the way that you switch the words you're using and
The both and.
Yeah, but also I wanted to understand more about the naming or what it means, the dialectical.
So dialectical is a it's a philosophy, and that's where it came from. It's a philosophical worldview. And when Marsha Linehan was developing the treatment, she was really focused on this both and treatment, on how can we engage in both acceptance and validation with our patients, and pushing for problem solving and change, like you're doing the best you can and you have to do more for our clients. And as she was developing and writing up the treatment, I mean, this is a really random story, that her administrative assistant at the time's partner or husband was a philosophy professor who had his expertise in dialectics. And as she was reading it, she's like, this is all about dialectics, with the idea that two things that are opposing opposites can both be true and present at the same time is a big part of it. And how do you find a synthesis and engage in a both and worldview? So that's where it came from. And I've actually spoken with other SLPs, speech and language pathologists, who said there's a lot of the underpinnings in the work that they do as well that comes from dialectical philosophy. Yes.
60 years ago, there was a philosophy.
Can you all hear her?
60 years ago, there was a philosophy that if a child had temper tantrums, you let the child just cry it out. And to this day, I followed that advice, but it haunts me that I should have just gone and cuddled the child. So what is today's philosophy on children who have temper tantrums?
It all depends on your theoretical orientation. There's lots of different ones. If you're somebody who's more on attachment theory, you would move in and problem solve and cuddle. A behaviorist may move in and sit with an experience without problem solving, but also, would let them cry it out also, as to not get what it is. So it all depends on your theory. I can tell you for myself, I can validate, similar to the story I was telling you earlier, like, okay, you can sit here and I'll sit here with you, and when you need a hug, let me know. But I also don't believe when they throw tantrums, they get what they want, right? Because that's more about my ability to tolerate my distress and not reinforcing giving them what they want with bigger behaviors. Because I have a fear, and not fear, I know from behavioral theory, when we don't respond to low-level behaviors and only respond to bigger behaviors, guess what we're going to see more of? Bigger behaviors. Right? If I've got a kid in the grocery store and they say, Mom, can I get candy? And I say no, right? Or they say, well, you said no last time, can you get it this time? I might say no, or I might say, well, maybe this is the reason why. But if all of a sudden they start amping up, and then they start like, I want the candy, give it to me, right? And now I'm getting embarrassed and everything. I say, Mom, take the candy, just stop crying, I'm making a spectacle, right? Next time they ask me for candy and I say no, they're likely to go right to, give me the candy on that, right? Because that's what we said, bigger behaviors get the reward. So we want to watch out for that. So I pay a lot of attention to what am I reinforcing with. If I have a kid that says to me like, I'm really struggling, I don't understand how to do my homework, I can't do it. If I say like, well, just figure it out, keep reading, but then all of a sudden they amp up like, I can't figure this out. Like, you're fine, figure it out, just read the instructions. I hate this, I'm not doing my homework. Fine, I'll sit down with you, and now let's go through and read it together. What's gonna happen the next time? They're gonna scream and not wanna do their homework, because I just said, when you ask effectively for help and no one responds, but then you scream ineffectively and I respond, guess what, I've just switched out what was effective and ineffective on that. So I'm paying attention to what are the behaviors I want more of and what are the behaviors I don't. That's a whole lot more on behavioral theory than you probably thought you were gonna get, but other questions, thank you.
You are wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Thank you. Well, again, thank you all. I will just share this with you. I appreciate you all attending. I know it is late for you all, and it's just amazing that you came out at this time. If you want, my website just has information about our trainings and the work that we do is dbtnschools.com. On social media. See, I do use social media. I don't think it's all bad. It's at DBT in Schools. We post a lot of things on there every day about skills and mental health in general. Feel free to follow us on that for information. And again, I just want to say thank you so much. Very grateful for the opportunity and the honor to come speak with all of you. There's a lot of turmoil in the world right now, and I think the more we can do to support each other's mental health will help us all get through it together. Thank you.
Very much.